Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Diep with the Deep Dive, and on this week's episode we will be looking at every single Disney Pixar film ever made and ranking them from worst to best. Pixar has been a powerhouse for high-grossing and award-winning animated features spanning for the past 25 years. It all started with a computer-animated film called Toy Story in 1995, and the success of that film continued on to where a Pixar film would be released at least once a year or every other year. Now it's almost a traditional event and is a topic of conversation amongst not just animation lovers but film lovers in general about what type of film Pixar will make next. And for the most part, their track record has been pretty solid. Albeit there have been a few needless sequels here and there, and now it seems they're a little caught up on trying to have the concept be the selling point of their films instead of just trying to sell an engaging story with beautiful visuals. But anyway, of all the lists I've done so far, this is probably going to be the one that's the most divisive in terms of how you feel about it. You're going to see films that you probably love at the bottom of my list and films that you hate at the top of my list, and that's okay. This is purely my opinion and is in no way meant to be seen as an objective list. And also because there's 22 films to go over, this ranking will be split into two videos, so this episode will actually be part 1, so that'll be number 22 through number 12, and part 2 will cover the rest. So, if you feel some sort of way about my list, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd like to know what you think. So without further ado, let's get this thing started. 22 Pixar films ranked worst to best starting now. Cars 2 isn't just a bad Pixar movie, it's a bad movie in general. I was never really a huge fan of Cars to begin with because the premise to me, even as a kid, was a little too much to ask when it came to my suspension of my own disbelief. There's just nothing really imaginative or expansive you can do in a universe where cars are running everything. They're like the humans of this universe. You start asking yourself questions, weird questions like, how do they use the bathroom? How do they run things like businesses and restaurants if they even have restaurants and businesses? And wait, how do they reproduce? Oh my god. But anyway, Cars 2 is a needless sequel that all of a sudden becomes a spy film centered around Mater the tow truck, and there's only so much you can handle of a character like that, so to make them the protagonist of the story and push aside the last film's protagonist, Lightning McQueen, it's not really a good choice to me, and it makes the film drag, and it feels longer than it is. Besides the bright, vibrant animation of the Tokyo setting this film is in, it has no real life or purpose to it, and the only thing worse than a sequel cash grab film is a meaningless sequel cash grab film. Again, why did we need 2 sequels to Cars? There's nothing more you can establish in this type of universe that was already given to us with the first film. This time around, it's a tired old story of old versus new. You know that old cliche with the stud athlete or the pro that was once the best in the world is now not the same anymore, so they train someone who reminds them of the younger version of themselves? Yeah, that age-old trope is used in Cars 3, and it's just more of the same. It's not terrible by any means, but the message of leaving your legacy behind and deciding when to call it quits is just repeatedly bashed over your head to the point where you're burnt out by the time the film reaches its halfway point. I feel like besides Cars, Finding Dory was a pointless sequel. As mentioned before, there are certain characters that work perfectly as only a supporting character or maybe a co-lead of a story. So when I heard that Finding Dory was coming out, I felt like I was the only one that was like, wait, what? Why? Okay, just hear me out. It feels like whenever Pixar has decided to do sequels like a Finding Dory, they always go with the same story of its central character, despite finding a peaceful resolution in the previous adventures, feeling the need to search for something deeper and more profound, so they set off to find that meaning. And that's basically what Finding Dory is. There's only so much you can do with a character like Dory, whose entire arc revolves around her memory loss issues, and they kind of play around with that in terms of a humorous side and emotional side, and to have an entire film that revolves around her adventures while dealing with something like this can feel tiresome, and it falls short of the magic, humor, and heart that made Finding Nemo such a classic. If you haven't figured out by now, I'm not a fan of Cars. This was the beginning of Pixar when they decided that selling toys was more important than telling an engaging story, and you could totally tell that by the fact that this film didn't really have anything going on in it. It's really hard, even for a kid's film, to find any real substance in the characters. Although I do think the voice casting is solid with Owen Wilson as Lightning McQueen, the late Paul Newman as Doc Hudson, and even Larry the Cable Guy as Mater the tow truck. It's such a forgettable and safe film, even by Pixar standards. Usually Pixar always tries to at least go beyond for something deeper in their films beyond just the kid-friendly humor, but Cars felt like it couldn't be anything more than that, and the animation is completely subpar compared to its previous and future works. Onward was a needless dip in quality that felt like the precursor build-up Pixar movie leading up to the upcoming Pixar release of Soul, which was supposed to come out later this year, but I doubt that's going to happen just because, COVID. But Onward got their theatrical release first in 2020 around March, but it's just so forgettable. At this point, the buddy formula in Pixar films has really run its course, and it felt like a desperate attempt to get audiences to cash in due to the voice casting of Disney darlings Chris Pratt and Tom Holland. The animation is decent, but it isn't really as fascinating or jaw-dropping or anything as breathtaking as previous works, and its repetitive themes of family and siblings gets in the way of any attempt to flesh out any real possibilities of something interesting happening in this entire movie. The Good Dinosaur. I honestly forget that this is even a Pixar film, but it's certainly paced in a way that can throw off an audience as the beginning is reminiscent of WALL-E, to where it focuses on its main character and there's not too much dialogue, but then once we meet a new character and they roll along with their adventures, that's when this film really goes downhill for me. If it had just focused on the dinosaur protagonist and placed it in a world that's presented in such beautiful animation and unforgettable palettes of wonder like there are in certain moments in this film, it could have been one of Disney's most thematically challenging movies and one of their most original ones yet. Instead, once we get into the introduction of the cave boy character that the dinosaur becomes best friends with, the entire movie falls apart. It starts turning into this slapstick adventure that just didn't work because it was just so inconsistent in its own journey. If not for some of the best animations Disney's done in a while in terms of the atmosphere, this would have been a lot lower on the list. Monsters University. The fact that we get a Monsters Inc. prequel is already a head-scratching idea within itself. It's almost like someone in the pitch meeting room said, "Wouldn't it be cool if we made a story about how Mike and Sully met in college and make it all about how they didn't like each other at first and then through a series of events and circumstances they became great friends?" Yeah, that's this whole movie. It honestly felt really uninspired and forgettable to the point where I honestly forgot about its existence. It's not terrible by any means, because John Goodman and Billy Crystal are still spot on as usual as their animated counterparts. And it has some genuinely funny moments and interesting idea with the college programs that delve into the monster world, but it lacks that certain heart and memorability that Monsters Inc. had. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Inside Out is overrated. This is the one Pixar film that runs into the issue of concept over execution. The one thing that everyone always talks about is how complex and out there the plot of this movie is compared to previous Pixar films, and I really think that's the hype train that really drove this movie to even bigger heights than it deserved. It even got an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay when I was thinking to myself, this thing just ripped off a bunch of other live-action movies that already happened that takes place inside the mind of somebody. Have you heard of Being John Malkovich? I get that it's a bold choice to make a film that's based entirely on someone's psyche, but the execution of it never really hits the mark and does anything that feels as risky or as original as the screenplay thinks it is. By having different emotions as the characters pushing buttons to express the only things they can feel, it almost feels like even the creators of the film didn't know exactly what to do with that, which is why the film primarily focuses on the characters of joy and sadness, because of course they just love the idea of opposites become best buds. I like the character of Bing Bong. Yeah, that's my favorite character, the imaginary pink elephant that joy and sadness run into. That's the best character in this entire movie, and he's not even an emotion. The plot that revolves around him is the most interesting, and that honestly would have been a more fascinating story to begin with, but instead we get the typical learning to let go and embracing the new and the strange trope that you could see coming a mile away. It honestly just feels like 90 minutes of the writers and the creators of this film patting themselves on the back thinking that they're geniuses, and it's kind of annoying. Okay, so second hot take. Coco is not as amazing to me as it is to everyone else. While I do think it's top 5 all time in Pixar when it comes to how visually stunning this film looks and how catchy the score and the soundtrack is, it's just such a predictable, formulated, and safe Pixar movie. I know I use that word a lot, safe, but it really is. There's no real stakes coming on here, and it has this formula that happens a lot in movies like this. And I say that because its narrative is almost exactly the same as films like Ratatouille and even Brave. It follows a young, ambitious, eccentric soul who has a penchant for something their family frowns upon, and through a series of events they go through, they discover themselves and also discover things about their family that they once quarreled with. And it ends with both parties having a deep, profound respect for one another. Other than that, the film moves at a style and pace that doesn't really work for me. Now, of course, the message of the film is pretty good, and the ending is touching and the one thing that everybody talks about, but a couple moments here and there doesn't make up for an entire film. That's like saying Up is the best Pixar movie ever made just because the first 10 minutes of it made you cry. How did the movie work as a whole? That's something you should ask yourself, not, oh yeah, the last 10 minutes made me cry, so obviously it has to be the best. We gotta look at films as a whole, guys, and what didn't work all the way for me, despite the gorgeous animation and music, are the plot elements, the villain reveal, and the story as a whole. The Toy Story saga is definitely the most consistent set of sequels of Pixar. It feels like because Toy Story was the first Pixar film to start it all, that there's just a little extra love put into each film, because without Toy Story, you don't get Pixar's success. This time around, the story is set at a much smaller scale and with a lot less at stake, and that's what makes this film, to me, the weakest of the Toy Story films. Although the voice cast performances, humor, and animation are all a huge highlight for me, there's a lot of decisions made along the way that felt really forced. Like, how did Bonnie, of all characters who wanted Woody so bad in the last film, just all of a sudden throw him away like he's nothing in this film? It almost shits all over what made the finale of Toy Story 3 so memorable, when Andy told Bonnie to promise him that she would take care of Woody better than everybody else because he's special, and she promises him. And what does she do in this movie? She replaces him with a fork. The writing decision there doesn't make much sense, given that it ended on a good note with Bonnie promising Andy all this and that she'd take care of Woody. So all of a sudden, she's just gonna act like an abomination of a creation like Forky is gonna replace him? And that strange writing decision just so we can get a fourth movie is kind of stupid and lazy. And then now we're forced to see Woody going on yet another solo adventure. The problem is we've already seen him separated from the group on like 2 other occasions in 2 different movies. I do love Woody's chemistry with Bo Peep, and that's probably the strongest thing in this film to me. And as usual, the animation looks amazing and the film wraps up pretty well, but was it really necessary? Was it a story that needed to be told? Not really. Brave was awesome, until it decided to focus on magic and bears, but it certainly doesn't deserve as much hate and pass over as a lot of critics gave it. It's one of the first few Pixar films to go back to the traditional Disney format regarding the realm of princesses and adventures. It has a good message about mother and daughter relationships and how communication is key to keep that a healthy relationship. But I don't really know if turning your mother into a bear is the most practical way to do it, but it's entertaining nevertheless. It's by no means anything groundbreaking, but if you love the Disney princess format, Brave doesn't really skip too many beats to satisfy that. Not to mention, this was the first Pixar film to really use the Dolby Atmos sound format, and I remember seeing this in theaters combined with Patrick Doyle's solid score. It sounded pretty badass, and our protagonist is actually relatable and badass as well. Okay guys, that's all we have for part 1 for this video. I hope you enjoyed that, or if you hated my list, good. Let me know in the comments why and why you disagreed. So stay tuned next time for part 2 of all 22 Pixar films ranked. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and share. Your support means everything to me and keeps me going to produce more content. I'll see you all next time.